Hi. The film I'll be talking about today is Risky Business. This film was written and directed by Paul Brickman and was released in 1983. This film stars Tom Cruise and Rebecca De Mornay. This was Tom Cruise's breakout role. He had done some other films before this, but none of them really took off. He'd done a film called Taps with Sean Penn and Timothy Hutton. He'd been in The Outsiders with every other young actor in Hollywood at that time. This was his first starring role. So he's a relative unknown at this stage in the game. And this movie became a sleeper hit. It did not have a big PR campaign. Nobody in it at the time was well known. Rebecca De Mornay, nobody knew who she was either. And this is one of those films that's hard to know how to even explain or categorize because it's got a young cast. It's about a teenager. It's about a boy who, while his parents are out of town, ends up turning his home into a brothel. But he calls a hooker over and they strike up the relationship. And she kind of mentions to him, with all my friends and your friends, if we got them together, we could make a lot of money one night. And on the surface, all that sounds like a typical teen comedy, the kind of stuff that was coming out in abundance at that time. Because this is 1983, and Animal House, I believe, came out in 1977, 1978. And then you had films like Caddyshack, Porky's, Revenge of the Nerds, just all those teen films. And then John Hughes is about to come on. In the teen film genre, the R-rated comedies were so one-dimensional. And it's all about innuendo. And it seemed as if those films were made for people who never developed past that state of maturity of those that just giggled in sex ed class. Like that, it was all about just a nude scene here and there, something awkward happens, somebody gets drunk, boy meets girl, she's not this. It was very formulaic and it dumbed it down. It was gross out humor. And there was zero depth. Risky Business is nothing like that. This is a film that is artistic, that is cerebral, that has something to say about youth, about sex, and does so intelligently and in such a way that it rewards the viewer for being smart. It gives young people credit that they can deal with these issues thoughtfully. And it also addresses the pressure, the anxiety that goes with being a teenager. That it's not just all beer parties and, sneaking out of the house and things like that. There's a lot of pressure put on teens to get into the right college, to get the right grades, to please mom and dad. Very few teenage films deal with that subject adequately. And as I said earlier, this film is almost like an art house film. And I remember when I saw it for the first time, I was like 13 or 14, and I was expecting kind of a teen. I came up in the generation where actors like Freddie Prinze Jr. and actresses like Sarah Michelle Gellar and Jessica Biel and Paul Walker and all those that were never what you call A-list stars, but found a home in the teen genre. Those were films like She's All That just had no real nuance or depth to them whatsoever. And going into it, that's what I was expecting with this film. And I'd seen films like Animal House and Porky's, and I remember when I first saw those films, not even understanding what was wrong with me. Why wasn't I laughing hysterically like everybody else my age? Maybe I just didn't have a good sense of humor. And when I saw this film, right from the get-go, I knew this was so far above those films. We first see Chicago, and this music is haunting that accompanies, and it accompanies the film beautifully, because this film goes back and forth between kind of real and surreal. It's a dance, and this film does it beautifully. And we see kind of like Chicago in this shadowy way. And we hear the L train, we hear engines rev, and then that music that kind of accompanies it, it's almost kind of hypnotic and sort of has this great tension that it's causing in the film, letting us know that we're in for something better than what the typical film about a teenager would be. And as the film progresses, we start to hear the narration of Joel Goodson, who's played by Tom Cruise. And it just goes black, and then the camera pulls out from this eye that's beneath these sunglasses and the cigarette hanging from his mouth. And the first thing we hear is the dream is always the same. And it shows him enter this house. And again, he just pulls up on his bike. And it feels like almost like a really good foreign film. And I'd never seen it, not just a teen movie like this, a film like this really, that was this artistically done. And he enters the home, and he's kind of looking around this empty house, and he slowly makes his way upstairs. And then when he enters the bathroom, because he hears the water running, and there's this gorgeous girl in the shower, and they have this brief intake of, what are you doing here? And he says, do you want me to leave? And she says, no, I want you to come here. And none of this feels gimmicky like a shower scene in Porky's. It feels very sexy and erotic, which is a hard thing for a film to capture, because is there anything less sexy than a film trying to be? Anything less erotic than a film trying to be that, like Body Heat or some of the 50 Shades of Grey? This film does it. And as he makes his way to her, when she says, I want you to come in here and wash my back, through the smoke, he's kind of going, and then he loses her. Next thing he knows, he's in his classroom, and all his friends are taking the SATs, and he's late, and he's blown his entire future. And those are probably the two things that are on any young man's life at that stage, more than anything else: sex and his future. Well, obviously when you're preoccupied with it, with sex. I mean, you've gone through puberty. The girls that you've known your entire life, their bodies are changing. You're going through these changes yourself. Women are still a mystery to you. You don't have the confidence because you haven't been in that many relationships as of yet. Your whole personality is about hiding those insecurities, putting your best face on in front of your friends, acting like you're experienced or confident in that, even if you're not. And then the other thing that goes with that is, because Joel's a senior in this film in high school, what's next? From 6 to 18, for 12 years, our life is mapped out for us. And then all of a sudden you're on the precipice of graduating high school, and now what? There's not as clear of a roadmap. Now, he knows he wants to go to college, not even because he's thought about it. His parents have just said, this is the path that you will follow. And we see that he's been born into money. And he comes from a family where mediocrity is unacceptable and unforgivable. And his parents, they don't just say, go on with your life and we just want the best for you. They want Ivy League. They don't want a state school. It's about keeping up with the Joneses. We don't want to have to tell our friends at the next country club luncheon that you went, heaven forbid, to a state school. And not a lot of films really capture what that can do to the psyche of an 18-year-old kid. Because your life at that point, it's not even really just your life. It's your parents. And you're also wrestling with what you might want. You want freedom and independence, but it's kind of hard to have that when mom and dad are still footing the bill for everything. And you also, even with that you still want to please them. It's a delicate and sometimes impossible dance to balance to strike. How can you do it? Can you even do it? And when we meet his parents, we see that they're getting ready to go out on vacation, and his father's lecturing him about the stereo. And the way the camera just spans through the house and the music, his dad opens and he says, obviously you and your friends have been messing with the stereo. There's too much bass here. And that scene is shot so beautifully in the sense that we hear Joel, but the camera's never on Joel during that scene, Tom Cruise. It's just his parents talking, and we see that they're these kind of robotic, out of touch yuppies who keep him on a very short leash. And we then see him drive them to the airport and wave goodbye. And then probably the most famous scene, not just in Risky Business, but in all of film, takes place where Tom Cruise does the slide across the hall and lip syncs to Bob Seger's Old Time Rock and Roll, which has come to be probably one of, as I said, the most iconic scenes ever. And it fits in beautifully here. And Joel has these friends that it's almost like they see how wound tight he is as well. And his friends, and this is where you empathize with Joel's plight, they're getting into Harvard. They're doing great, scoring high on SATs. Their SAT scores are through the roof. The sky's the limit for them. And Joel is kind of having to work a little bit harder just to keep up with them. And, says, I just can't afford to make a mistake. I can't screw up. I can't do that. Well, a friend goes over to visit him, and he's kind of letting him know, you're wound too tight. You need to loosen up. You need to, have a little fun. And he always says you got to learn to say what the, and we'll say hell for YouTube's sake, but he says it a little rougher in the film. And he's always pushing Joel to kind of break loose a little bit. Shake off the constraints your parents put on you. Quit being such an Eagle Scout. Learn how to enjoy yourself. Take a step towards being independent, towards being a man. Learn how to have a little fun. And the first thing Joel does is he just takes his dad's Porsche for a little joyride, but doesn't do anything stupid. And when his friend's over there and he's out there raking the leaves and doing everything mom and dad had left on the list for him to do, his friend's reading the paper and reading out information about these escorts and telling him this stuff, and he's just blowing it off. Well, his friend ends up calling and giving his name. And this leads to one of the more humorous scenes in the film where it ends up being a man as a woman showing up, dressed as a woman showing up. And Joel kind of backs out of it and is mortified. But before he leaves, passes a note to Joel and said, here, call this number and ask for Lana. It's what you want. It's what every boy in a neighborhood like this wants. And we then see him kind of fantasize, and his fantasies interrupted, like with his parents and the cop showing up outside the house telling him to get off the babysitter. And it's another good sequence in the film. And eventually he surrenders to his desires and decides to make the phone call. And there's a scene where he pulls a catcher's mask over his face as he's talking to her, because we know how scared to death. He's truly stepping outside of himself now. And she said, what's your name? And he just says, Ralph. He can't say his real name. And then it's like showing him shaving and getting ready, and he eventually falls asleep on the couch waiting for her. And then we meet Lana, played by Rebecca De Mornay. And we see one of the more intense, voyeuristic, erotic scenes in film when they have their first encounter. And it's shot so skillfully in this thing of, we don't really see much, but we feel like we do. And you feel the intensity of the encounter that they first have. And we know this is Joel's first time. And Rebecca De Mornay, it's one thing to be pretty, to be beautiful. It's a whole nother thing to be sexy. She is sexy. And she has this sophistication about her that while she's really not any older than Joel, she's seen things, done things, lived in a world that he's been shielded from his entire life. And it's almost like in that moment when we see those two worlds collide. And Paul Brickman does such a great job shooting that first encounter. And then, the next morning he's telling her what a great time he had. And she's sitting there, smoking a cigarette. And she said, "Oh, yeah, it's great. And this is nice. Oh, by the way, you owe me $300. And it's at that point that we realize Lana, who's played by Mornay, is not, has no delusions of that was, a romantic thing. That's her job. And while it may have meant everything to him, this is what she does for a living and she expects her money. He then says, "Listen, I can go get a bond from the bank. I'll get it to you." When he comes back, his mother's crystal egg, that is kind of like her prized possession in the home, has been taken. He then has to track her down, where we meet her pimp, played by Joe Pantoliano, who's really great in this film, is Guido, this guy from the underworld. When Joel tracks her down, she's had a fight with him and is wanting to get away from him. And then they kind of go off into the night in his dad's Porsche and get in this kind of funny little chase. And basically what ends up happening is she ends up staying at his house. They start to get somewhat close, but he's emphatic that this has to end. I'll give you a day or two here, and then you got to go. And there's a scene where they go out at night to smoke pot and eat ice cream, and they're just kind of standing around. And they start to really communicate with each other as just, guy to girl, not client. And, and as they're talking, he says something to her about, "So why did you leave home?" And she looks at him and very nonchalantly says, "Because my stepfather wouldn't quit coming on to me." And he kind of apologizes, and she says, "No, I really do want to talk to you." And he asks her another question. She lets him know that she has a brother, and he said, "Well, what's he doing?" She said, "Oh, he's in school." And he said, "How come you're not?" She looks at him and she says, "I'm really trying to be friends with you, but I would appreciate it if you'd quit judging me while you're leaning up against your dad's $40,000 car." And turns to walk off and goes and won't come back. And he's kind of, his naivete of asking those kind of questions and not understanding how it would come off judgmental, because he's lived such a, cloistered existence. He's been shielded from everything. He lives in a world whereby has trust funds, where it's kind of shame's been brought to the family if you just can't go Ivy League. Her world is so foreign to him that it was almost inevitable that he would stick his foot in his mouth. And two, the answers that she gave him about her stepfather and those things are what keep this film from being a film like A Pretty Woman that was really nothing more than Top Gun for hookers, as Jennifer Jason Leigh put it. This film goes deeper. These are real people. There's nuance here. There's depth here with the writing. Unfortunately, when she walks away, when she went in his dad's car to grab a jacket, she actually hit the brake and ended up locking the keys in the car, released the emergency brake. Car ends up rolling in the water. At this point, Joel has really run afoul of everything. And he goes to her in desperation and basically says, "Let's throw that party you were talking about. You bring your friends, I'll bring mine, and we'll make the money back." And he can pay for his dad's car and probably then have some left over. And in the midst of this party, as they go about doing it, and his recruiter the representative for Clemson, that's where I went to college, Princeton University, shows up at the party the night that they're throwing this big blowout to make money back. And he ends up having a tryst with one of the girls there, and Joel thinks that he's completely blown everything. The guy tells him, "Look, your grades are good, but it's not Ivy League quality, but I'll do what I can." And at this point, at this scene, we see that Joel is somewhat coming into himself. He's wearing these black sunglasses. He's smoking. He's kind of no longer the boy. He has become a man. He is his own man. He's making his own decisions. He's lost his innocence. Lana led him out of that world and into hers. And he's feeling comfortable there. And he's taken on a new aura about him. He's not as insecure as he would have been before. And at this point, after the night has ended and they've made their money, there's a scene where he and Lana go on a train. One of her things is she wanted to make love on a train. And the Phil Collins song, Something in the Air, is playing while they're on the train together. And it is one of the more sensual scenes you'll ever see, and you don't see anything. There's films where you see so much more that are not the least bit sexy, erotic, anything. You don't even feel like a voyeur. In this film, you do. And it shows that when you're invested in the characters, when you can feel the sexual tension between them, you don't have to try as hard to get it across on screen. It will happen, and it can happen. And this scene shoots that so tastefully and artistically that it's almost as if it's putting sex and eroticism in some way on a pedestal rather than degrading it and making it and only viewing it from the vantage point of guys in the locker room, which is what a lot of teenage comedies and anything with sex really does. It seems like a bad, steamy MTV music video or something that, like, back when they were even doing videos like Enrique Iglesias or some, Silly Rascal Flatts video where, they're making out in the pool and the music's just pound. You don't need all that. If you have the real thing, let it speak for itself. And you don't have to overstuff it, which is what a lot of films do. They just try to hit you over the head with it. Subtlety is lost. Joel then returns home after this, realizes this entire house has been robbed, cleaned out. And then he gets back on the phone he calls Lana, but who picks up but her pimp, Guido, who explains to him that if you want the stuff back, you're going to have to pay for it. You took my two best girls, you made money, and now you're about to have to pay it back over. Joel goes from being that guy with the sunglasses who's coming to his own to right back to being the kid who's terrified because his parents are about to be home in 2 hours. And seeing him vacillate between those two worlds is so interesting, and so is what makes watching this movie a real treat. And what I have to give credit to Tom Cruise as well, he does it so effortlessly. It's seamless. He goes from being the kid who overthinks everything to being the guy that when he puts the shades on and lights the cigarette, he's just got this effortless, cool quality, and he seems like, he really could be a pimp himself and at home in the underworld, but only for a time. And he wears both hats, and they both fit him great. And so when he's buying his mother's stuff back, he, is able to restore the house, and there at the very end, there's a scene where he's down to $40, and that elusive crystal egg that he's wanted back for some is the last item to buy. And she ends up throwing it in the air, and he jumps and goes like this to catch it and bring it in, but he does catch it before it hits the ground. It's kind of a well-shot scene. And he gets the house completely back to the way it was before. His friends come over, they get the furniture moved in, all the clothes back, everything. And then mom and dad come rolling in, and they say hello. He goes out to help the dad bring the stuff in. When he comes back, his mom says, "There's a little spot on this egg. It's cracked. What happened?" And she is livid. And she looks at him and says, "It just frightens me that you can just be this irresponsible. Like, it just disgusts me." And we're sitting there thinking, if she only knew, if that crystal egg could talk, if she knew the story attached to that. And in reality, that thing was probably there all along. It then cuts to Joel kind of returning to his regular mundane life outside raking. And then he kind of pauses and the wind picks up and the leaves are going. He puts it and the lights. For that moment, it's kind of an homage to the weekend that had just taken place. He gets to step back in that world for just that second. And then he's back to his new reality. And as he comes out of the fence where he's been raking and comes around the corner, his dad sees him. And he said, apparently you had quite an interview with the guy from Princeton. And Joel says, yeah. And he just looks at him. He's thinking, I guess I've been found out. What he said? And he looks at him. He says, Princeton could use a guy like Joel Goodson. You got in. Joel got in. This is how he finds out. And his dad looks at him and says, what have I been telling you, son? Sometimes you just got to say, what the heck? If the dad only knew who else had been telling him that, and for different reasons. But that theme kind of keeps coming up. And the film then ends with he and Lana at a restaurant talking. And he said, I was just thinking about in the next 10 years. And she said, I think we're both going to make it big. And then he asks her, that night that you took me on the train, was it a setup? Just to get me out of the house so they could rob it. And she says no. And it ends with them walking into the night and then the voiceover about human fulfillment, about the night that he made the 8,000 time of your life. And it's a great little narration. Interestingly enough, Paul Brickman, the writer, the director, did not want that ending. He didn't want Joel getting into Princeton. He didn't want he and Lana to end on good terms. He wanted it to end with them looking outside and her at a restaurant somewhere just looking at the city and her saying, why does it have to be so hard? And then Joel says, I don't know. And the studio didn't want to go with that ending. And I think this film is as close to perfect as any film that has ever been made. I think it wasn't probably even nominated for Best Picture in 1983. In my opinion, it probably was the best picture of 1983. But when I saw who directed, I thought, Paul Brickman, why don't I hear that name more? Why didn't he go on to write and direct more films? He was obviously talented. He was so disgusted with the studio making him change the ending that he cared so much about and making him settle for a happy one. He was done from that point on. It jaded him. He didn't want to have to compromise when it came to his art. And while I think that the ending that they settled on is a great one, I respect Paul Brickman's loyalty to his vision as well. And I can understand the anger that would come from him because this film ultimately is his baby. And it's that tricky relationship between art and commerce. Just to go back over before I wrap this up, if you love artsy films, there are films in this movie, there's a shot where the water hose slowly comes into the shot as he's doing his chores and things like that. This film is such a stylish, sexy, cerebral film that if you haven't seen it, you really, really are missing out. And I'm not the biggest, I think Tom Cruise has done some great, I thought he was great in Rain Man and Magnolia. For Top Gun, he did what needed to be done. I think Top Gun Maverick was horrible. I think that was nothing more than exploiting in nostalgia. I saw the film. I don't even know what it's about. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. He's obviously a movie star. But when you see him in this, you realize what a good actor he is. And it's weird that his breakout role, to me at least, is the best thing he ever did. He was good in Magnolia, I have to say that, but he was a supporting character. His films as a leading man, a lot of his other films surpass this one in terms of money and gross. But as far as substance, I don't think he ever surpassed this film. And I think you would agree when you see it. It's one of those that you don't forget it after you've seen it. And it's refreshing to see a film like this, especially a film done to show that the genre, the teen film, can be done so well, so artistically, and with such respect. Because there's a plethora of other films out there that do it the opposite way. So every once in a while, it's good to see one that will restore your faith in it again. Until next time, thanks.